beast of the Highlands. The wind howled across the rugged Scottish Highlands, carrying with it the scent of blood and the echoes of battle. The year was 745 AD, and the land was torn by the endless struggles of warring clans. Among them, one name struck fear into the hearts of all who heard it: Duncan MacDrustan. Duncan was a man shrouded in mystery, his origins unknown to even those who fought alongside him. He arrived at Clan MacDrustan as a young teenage boy, appearing suddenly one stormy night, his clothes tattered and his eyes cold. When questioned, he claimed his parents had been killed by marauding invaders, though some whispered that Duncan himself had ended their lives. The truth was lost to time, but one fact remained: Duncan was unlike any other. The clan, recognizing the raw potential within the boy, took him in and began training him as one of their warriors. From the very beginning, it was clear that Duncan was different. He showed a ferocity unseen before, a hunger for violence that unnerved even the most seasoned fighters. In training bouts, he never lost a match, his opponents often leaving the field bloodied and broken. There was a darkness in him, a deep, insatiable thirst for the thrill of battle. As Duncan grew, so did his reputation. He became known as an undefeated warrior, a man who feared nothing and no one. His name spread across the Highlands, a whisper on the wind that carried with it tales of his ferocity. In battles against rival clans, Duncan was a force of nature, cutting through enemy lines with a savage glee. It was said that in a single battle, he killed more than 100 men, his laughter echoing across the battlefield as he reveled in the carnage. The men of Clan MacDrustan were both awed and terrified of him. Duncan was their greatest asset, the reason no other clan dared to challenge them. But he was also a danger, a wild beast, barely contained within human form. Even the clan leaders, men who had seen decades of war, spoke of him in hushed tones, their voices laced with unease. Duncan, however, cared little for their fear. He lived for the fight, for the moment when steel met flesh and blood flowed freely. It was in those moments that he felt most alive, as if the very act of killing was a balm for some deep-seated wound within his soul. His bloodlust was not without cost. The more he killed, the more detached he became from the world around him. He shunned the camaraderie of his fellow warriors, preferring to spend his nights alone, sharpening his weapons or staring into the flames of the hearth, his mind lost in thoughts of the battles yet to come. The elders of the clan began to speak of him as a cursed man, one touched by the old gods, or perhaps by something even darker, but none dared to confront him, for to do so was to invite death. Instead, they watched him from afar, unsure of what to do with the man who had become both their greatest protector and their greatest threat. It was during this time that rumors began to circulate of a man from the north, a traveler who had crossed paths with Duncan on the battlefield. This man spoke of a strange power within Duncan, a power that went beyond mere skill with a blade. He claimed that Duncan's eyes had glowed with an unnatural light as he fought, and that those who faced him felt an overwhelming sense of dread, as if they were staring into the eyes of death itself. The clan dismissed these tales as the ravings of a madman, but the seed of doubt had been planted. They began to wonder if there was more to Duncan than met the eye, if perhaps his ferocity was not just a result of his upbringing, but something far more sinister. As the years passed, Duncan's legend only grew. He became a symbol of fear, a name mothers whispered to their children to keep them in line. But for all his victories, for all the blood he spilled, there was a darkness within him that could not be sated, a hunger that grew with each passing day. And so, Duncan MacDrustan continued to fight, to kill, to revel in the chaos of battle, but deep down, he knew that his time was coming. The beast within him was growing stronger, and soon it would break free. And when it did, not even the Highlands would be able to contain the fury of the man who would one day become known as the Master. The Beast Unleashed. Time passed in the Highlands, and a strange peace settled over the land. Word of Duncan McDruston's ferocity had spread far and wide, and no clan dared challenge his. The stories of his savagery in battle, of his bloodlust, and the sheer joy he took in killing had become legend. Men feared him as they feared death itself, and so they stayed away, leaving Duncan's clan unchallenged. But peace did not suit Duncan McDruston. The lack of battle, the absence of bloodshed, gnawed at him like a festering wound. He grew agitated and angry, his hands itching for the feel of a sword, his mind consumed by the hunger to fight. Without enemies to face, Duncan's rage turned inward, and he began to sow discord within his own clan. What started as minor disputes escalated into full-blown conflicts. Duncan, desperate to quench his thirst for violence, provoked his fellow clansmen into fights. He picked quarrels over the smallest of slights, baiting his comrades into brawls that left them bloodied and bruised. Even his closest friends began to fear him, for the man they had once respected had become a sadistic beast, driven by a singular desire: to fight, to kill, to feel the rush of battle. Duncan's reputation, once that of an invincible warrior, became tainted with whispers of madness. He no longer fought for honor or for the protection of his clan. He fought because it was the only thing that gave his life meaning. The clan leaders, who had once seen Duncan as their greatest asset, now viewed him with growing concern. They could sense the darkness within him, a darkness that threatened to tear their clan apart from within. It was during this time of unrest that news reached the Highlands of a new threat. Men from across the seas were raiding the coastal towns, villages, and churches of Scotland. They came in longships, their sails like the wings of ravens, and they showed no mercy to those they encountered. These invaders were called Vikings, and their ferocity in battle was unmatched. The tales of Viking raids spread quickly, how they descended upon peaceful villages like wolves upon sheep, burning homes, slaughtering men, and taking women and children as slaves. They were warriors unlike any the Scots had faced before, fierce and relentless, driven by a desire for plunder and conquest. When Duncan McDruston heard of these invaders, a twisted smile spread across his face. At last, he thought, warriors worthy of facing him. The idea of meeting these Vikings in battle thrilled him in a way nothing else had. The prospect of crossing swords with men as ferocious and unyielding as himself awakened something deep within him, a hunger that had lain dormant for far too long. Driven by this newfound purpose, Duncan demanded that his clan prepare to defend the shores from these invaders. He cared not for the protection of his people, nor for the sanctity of their lands. All he wanted was the chance to fight, to kill, to revel in the chaos of battle once more. Under Duncan's command, a group of Scottish warriors made their way to the coastal area where the raids were happening. They marched in silence, their faces grim, their hearts heavy with the knowledge that they were led not by a hero, but by a man consumed by his own bloodlust. They arrived at a small, peaceful village, nestled along the coast, its people unaware of the storm that was about to descend upon them. Duncan McDruston, however, was already restless, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of the Viking longships. His reputation had preceded him, and even among his own men, there was a palpable fear of what he might do when the battle finally came. As the warriors settled in, laying in wait for the inevitable raid, Duncan could barely contain his excitement. He paced like a caged beast, his mind filled with visions of the carnage to come. The thought of meeting warriors who could match his ferocity, who would not cower before him, who might even best him in combat, was intoxicating. Days passed in tense anticipation, the air thick with the smell of salt and the distant cries of seabirds. The villagers went about their daily lives, unaware that their fate lay in the hands of a man who cared nothing for their safety. For Duncan, the village was nothing more than a battleground, and its people mere pawns in his quest for blood. Then, one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the lookouts spotted dark shapes on the water. Viking longships, their sails filled with the evening breeze, cutting through the waves with deadly purpose. The time had come, and Duncan McDruston's heart raced with excitement. The beast within him roared in anticipation, eager to be unleashed. He gathered his men, their faces set in grim determination, though many of them cast nervous glances at their leader. Duncan, however, was a man transformed, his eyes alight with a madness that sent shivers down their spines. As the longships drew closer, the villagers began to realize the danger they were in. Panic spread through the streets as families rushed to gather what little they could carry and flee to the safety of the surrounding hills. But Duncan McDruston paid them no mind. His gaze was fixed on the approaching ships, his thoughts consumed by the battle that was about to unfold. When the first of the longships touched the shore, the Vikings leapt out, their axes and swords gleaming in the dying light. They moved with the confidence of seasoned warriors, their faces painted with the marks of their gods, their war cries echoing across the beach. Duncan McDruston drew his sword, the blade catching the last rays of the setting sun. His heart pounded in his chest as he stepped forward to meet the invaders, his lips curling into a savage grin. At last, he would face an enemy worthy of his skill, worthy of his hatred. With a roar, Duncan charged down the hill towards the beach, his men following close behind. The clash of steel on steel, the screams of the dying, and the smell of blood filled the air as Duncan McDruston once again became the beast of the Highlands, a force of nature unleashed upon the world. In the chaos of battle, Duncan fought with a ferocity that seemed to defy human limits. His sword was an extension of his will, cutting down any Viking who dared stand before him. For Duncan, this was not just a fight. It was a release, a return to the only thing that had ever given his life meaning. As the battle raged on, the villagers watched from the hills, their hearts heavy with dread. They knew that this was not a fight for their salvation, but a bloodbath, fueled by one man's insatiable hunger for violence. Duncan McDruston had found his war, and nothing would stand in his way. As the last of the invaders lay defeated at his feet, Duncan McDruston stood amidst the carnage, his chest heaving, his sword dripping with blood. The bodies of Viking warriors, once thought invincible, were strewn across the sand, their lifeless eyes staring blankly at the sky. But for Duncan, the victory was hollow. He looked out to the dark sea, the cold wind whipping through his hair, and screamed into the void, "Is this it? Send more, more." His voice echoed across the shore, a primal roar of defiance and desperation. The fellow warriors who had fought beside him looked at him not with the shared triumph of victory, but with fear. Was this madness, or something darker, something they could not understand? Duncan McDruston's bloodlust had become something more than the thirst for battle. It was a consuming force, a darkness that seemed to grow with every life he took. News of the unstoppable warrior who could not be bested in battle spread far and wide. Stories of Duncan's ferocity reached the ears of Viking chieftains, and soon they began to send their best warriors to the shores Duncan McDruston guarded. These were not mere raiders, but the elite of Viking society, berserkers and skilled fighters who craved the glory of combat, who sought to prove their worth to their kin and their gods. Whenever the call to arms was raised, Duncan McDrustan seemed to draw new strength from the thrill of the fight. The prospect of facing these legendary warriors, of testing his might against theirs, filled him with a twisted excitement. Each battle was an opportunity to inflict more pain, to revel in the suffering of those who dared challenge him. He no longer fought to defend his clan or his homeland. He fought for the sheer ecstasy of violence. The shores of Scotland became a proving ground for the greatest warriors of the North. Wave after wave of Viking champions arrived, eager to test their mettle against the man who had become a living legend. They came in greater numbers, with better weapons and deadlier tactics, but each time Duncan McDrustan met them with the same unrelenting ferocity. But with each battle, the toll began to show. Duncan's body, once seemingly impervious to fatigue and injury, started to betray him. He fought on, drawing on reserves of strength, fueled by his insatiable hunger for combat, but even his ferocity could not keep pace with the increasing onslaught. The warriors he faced were not just strong, they were cunning, fighting with a strategic mind honed by years of battle. And as more and more warriors came to test their might against him, Duncan found himself pushed to the brink. One fateful day, the tide turned. A force larger and more formidable than any Duncan had faced before arrived at the shore. These were the very best of the Vikings, the berserkers, wild-eyed and fearless, their bodies covered in the scars of countless battles, and the most skilled fighters, masters of the sword and axe, who fought with a fervour matched only by Duncan's own. The battle was brutal and unrelenting. The air was thick with the clash of steel, the cries of the dying, and the roar of the sea. Duncan fought with all the strength he had left, his sword cutting through flesh and bone, his rage propelling him forward, even as his body weakened. But for the first time, Duncan McDrustan found himself overwhelmed. The berserkers came at him, their wild attacks impossible to predict. The skilled fighters danced around him, their strikes precise and deadly. He was outnumbered, surrounded on all sides. Blow after blow landed on his body, and though he fought back with every ounce of strength he could muster, the inevitability of defeat loomed over him. Blood poured from wounds that refused to heal, his vision blurred by sweat and pain. For the first time, Duncan felt the cold grip of fear. He staggered, barely able to stand, yet still he tried to fight, driven by a primal instinct that refused to accept defeat. His own kin, the warriors who had fought beside him for so long, watched in horror as Duncan, the undefeated, the invincible, fell to his knees. They saw the madness in his eyes, the desperation of a man who had known nothing but victory and bloodshed. Many of them wanted to leave him to his fate, to let the beast finally be slain. But in the end, loyalty, perhaps to the man he once was, or perhaps to the legend he had become, prevailed. With heavy hearts, they decided to drag Duncan from the fray. They fought their way through the throng of Viking warriors, risking their lives to pull him from the battlefield. Duncan struggled against them, his voice hoarse with rage as he screamed for them to let him go, to let him fight, but they held him fast, retreating from the battlefield with their broken leader in tow. "Retreat!" they shouted, the word foreign and bitter on their tongues. It was a word Duncan McDrustan had never known, a concept he had never accepted. But now, as he lay in their arms, his body battered and broken, he was forced to confront the one thing he had always believed was impossible: defeat. As they carried him away from the battlefield, Duncan's mind swirled with anger and confusion. His vision faded in and out, the faces of his comrades blurred and distant. The pain was overwhelming, but more than that, it was the realization that his unrelenting desire for battle, his insatiable hunger for bloodshed, had finally brought him to this. Broken, defeated, and dragged away from the one thing that had ever given his life meaning. As darkness overtook him, Duncan McDrustan's last thought was a bitter one. that the beast within him had finally been caged, not by the strength of his enemies, but by the limits of his own mortal flesh. Far inland, in the depths of an ancient, dark forest, a strange light flickered briefly, unseen by any but the creatures of the woods. A slit in the fabric of reality itself appeared, and from this ethereal tier stepped a man, cloaked in shadows. His skin was pale, his eyes sunken, and his presence exuded a cold, ancient power. As he emerged, he muttered under his breath, "Damn you, Father! You are not worthy of your position. You have belittled me for the last time, sending me out to find a champion for you, when I, your son, should be your champion." Shifting from shadow to shadow, the figure moved with supernatural grace, his vampiric senses attuned to the faintest hints of suffering and bloodshed. It wasn't long before he found himself at the camp where Duncan McDruston lay, drawn to the scent of blood like a predator to its prey. The camp was silent, the aftermath of a brutal battle evident in the air. Hovering around the tent where Duncan McDruston rested, the figure became one with the shadows, unseen by mortal eyes. Inside, Duncan lay on a makeshift bed, his body broken and battered, his spirit burning with unfulfilled rage. The figure could sense the fury within Duncan, the anger at being limited by his mortal form, the bitterness of a warrior who could no longer fight. A twisted smile crept across the figure's face as he whispered to himself, "Here's one for you, Father. I hope he is as uncontrollable with you as he was as a man." Materializing within the tent, the figure's presence became palpable. "Hello," a voice said, cold and calm. Duncan McDruston, instinctively reaching for his sword, found his arm too weak to obey. His eyes narrowed at the sight of the stranger. "No need for that," the figure spoke again. "I am a friend who may be able to help you continue your fight." Duncan's voice was hoarse, filled with suspicion. "What are you?" "A doctor." The figure smiled, his expression both eerie and inviting. "Yes, you could say that. I am Dr. Thorne. My father," he spat on the ground, "is looking for warriors just like you." Duncan McDruston laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "I am no good to anyone now. Soon, I will be dead." Dr. Thorne's smile widened. "But there are still so many to kill, so many battles to fight, so many to be slaughtered." At these words, Duncan's eyes glinted with a familiar hunger. "Yes," he whispered, the fire in his heart reigniting. "I must kill them all." He tried to move, but his body, battered and broken, refused to obey. Dr. Thorne stepped closer, his voice low and enticing. "What if I could offer you new power, new strength, the power to fight eternally? All you need to do is become a champion for my father. After the great war of the gods, he seeks to build an army of champions, and you would be his first." Duncan laughed again, though this time with a hint of mockery. "And what of you, Dr. Thorne? Do you not fight for your father? Are you not his champion?" For a moment, Dr. Thorne's eyes flared with anger, a deep, burning resentment. "I understand your frustration. I, too, was scorned for wanting to be the best. My mother and father sought to contain the warrior within me, to hold me back. But in the end, it was they who unleashed it." Dr. Thorne's eyes softened, and he smiled, a twisted, knowing smile. "So, do we have a deal?" "Aye," Duncan McDruston replied, his voice firm despite his broken body. "If you can give me the power to fight again, then I am yours." Dr. Thorne looked at him thoughtfully. "If you are not the first, I would make you one of my children, but my father would know. So..." Dr. Thorne paused, his expression darkening as he reached out to the void. "Here, Father," he called out, his voice reverberating through the tent. "I have your champion. He is perfect." At that instant, a dark, swirling portal opened before them, a vortex of shadow and malice. From within, a deep and powerful voice echoed, filling the space with a presence that seemed to shake the very fabric of reality.
"Welcome, Duncan McDrustan."
Duncan, with what little strength remained, gazed into the abyss of the portal. The voice was commanding, otherworldly, and it resonated with a power that dwarfed even his own bloodlust. Dr. Thorne stepped back, his eyes fixed on Duncan as the portal's energy began to engulf the fallen warrior. "You are now my father's chosen," he said with a mix of reverence and resentment. "Serve him well." Duncan McDrustan, the once undefeated warrior, felt a surge of new power begin to course through his veins, a dark and ancient energy that promised him the strength to fight once more. As the portal consumed him, his last thoughts were not of fear or regret, but of the countless battles yet to be fought and the blood yet to be spilled. Dr. Thorne vanished into the shadows, leaving Duncan McDrustan alone before the swirling dark portal. As Duncan peered deeper into the abyss, a sudden, overwhelming fear gripped him, something he had not felt in a long time. From within the portal, he saw eyes staring back at him, eyes filled with an unimaginable darkness and a power that seemed to stretch across the very fabric of reality. These were the eyes of Nocturna, the god of the elders, the god of vampires, a being of supreme power and an insatiable hunger for blood. Duncan was entranced, unable to look away as the portal's energy began to wrap around him, pulling him into its cold embrace. His body trembled, not from weakness or exhaustion, but from the sheer force of the transformation that was overtaking him. He could feel his very essence being rewritten, every fiber of his being torn apart and reassembled into something new, something dark and powerful. His bones stretched and reshaped, his muscles twisted and reformed, becoming stronger, more resilient. His skin, once roughened by years of battle, smoothed and paled, taking on an unnatural, almost deathly hue. His senses sharpened to an almost painful degree. He could hear the faintest rustle of leaves outside the tent, smell the blood still soaked into the earth from the recent battle, and taste the fear lingering in the air like a palpable mist. His heart, once a vessel of human passion and rage, slowed its beat until it was almost imperceptible. He no longer needed it to pump blood through his veins. Something far darker now fueled his existence. His teeth elongated into sharp fangs, and his eyes, once filled with the fire of a warrior, now glowed with a crimson light, reflecting the hunger that gnawed at his very soul. The voice of Nocturna boomed from beyond the portal, shaking the very ground beneath Duncan's feet.
"You shall be my champion, my master of death and destruction,"
the voice declared, each word vibrating through Duncan's transforming body.
"Yes, I can feel your lust for blood. Soon your lust will be insatiable, unsatisfiable. You will be unstoppable, my champion, my master of destruction."
Duncan McDrustan, now fully engulfed in the energy of the portal, felt his mind expand with new knowledge, new instincts. He could sense the flow of life around him, feel the pulse of blood in every living creature within miles. But more than that, he felt the overwhelming, all-consuming hunger that came with his new existence, a need to feed, a need to kill, that eclipsed even the bloodlust he had known as a mortal. The transformation was complete. Duncan McDrustan, the warrior of the Highlands, was no more. In his place stood a creature of immense power, a vampiric being now known as an elder, one of the first and most powerful of his kind. He was no longer bound by the limitations of humanity. He had transcended into something far more terrifying. Standing in the dimly lit tent, Duncan looked down at his hands, marveling at the strength coursing through them. He flexed his fingers, feeling the power that now resided in every muscle, every tendon. He felt invincible, as though nothing in this world could stand against him. The wounds that had nearly killed him were gone, his body fully healed and stronger than it had ever been. But with this newfound power came an overwhelming urge, a hunger so intense it was almost painful. It clawed at him from the inside, demanding to be sated. It was a hunger, not just for food, but for blood, for the life force of others. He could feel it pulsing through his veins, a relentless drive that pushed him to seek out and consume the blood of the living. The desire to kill, once a thrill he pursued with abandon, was now a need, a compulsion that could not be ignored. The thought of sinking his fangs into flesh, of draining the life from his prey, filled him with a dark, perverse excitement. He could sense the fear of those around him, could almost taste the blood that flowed beneath their skin. Duncan, now the master, stood in the tent, his mind swirling with thoughts of the carnage he would unleash, the death and destruction he would bring in the name of his new god, Nocturna. His old life was gone, replaced by a new existence of eternal hunger and unending power. As he stepped out of the tent into the night, the cold air did nothing to cool the fire burning within him. He was reborn, a creature of the darkness, and the world would soon tremble before the wrath of the master, the champion of Nocturna. The highlands would be his hunting ground, and every living soul was now his prey. The screams from Duncan McDruston's small encampment echoed through the highlands, carried by the wind for miles. Those who had once saved him, those who had fought by his side, were now his first victims. Duncan, or rather the creature he had become, cared little for the bonds of kinship or loyalty. These men and women were nothing more than prey, their blood the fuel that ignited the new power coursing through his veins. With the first taste of blood, Duncan felt a surge of energy unlike anything he had ever known. His body, once mortal and frail, was now filled with a dark, intoxicating strength. Each drop of blood he consumed only heightened his senses, sharpened his instincts. The faces of his clan, brothers and sisters, flashed before him as he drained the life from them, but their familiarity meant nothing. In his new existence, there was no room for sentiment or mercy. As he slaughtered them one by one, the knowledge of what he had become settled into his mind, a gift from Nocturna, the god who had remade him. He was no longer bound by the limitations of a mere man. He was an elder now, a master of death and destruction, and his purpose was clear: to feed, to kill, to serve the insatiable hunger that now defined his existence. When the last of his clan lay lifeless at his feet, Duncan sensed something far beyond the encampment. Fear, bloodshed, the scent of a battle. Somehow, he knew what to do, as if the knowledge had been planted in his mind. He could meld with the shadows, an ability granted to him by Nocturna. It was as natural as breathing, and with a mere thought, he shifted through the darkness, covering vast distances in the blink of an eye. He emerged from the shadows at the site of a Viking raid, where marauders were slaughtering and plundering a local church. Without hesitation, Duncan entered the fray. The killing was unlike anything he had experienced before. He moved with supernatural speed and strength, his body a blur as he tore through the invaders. The Vikings, fierce and battle-hardened, were no match for him. He drained them of their life force, their blood, a rich, powerful elixir that fueled his every move. Within moments, the battle was over, and the ground was littered with the bodies of the fallen. Duncan stood amidst the carnage, his chest heaving with the thrill of the hunt. The power, the sheer ecstasy of the kill was more than he had ever imagined. He felt invincible, unstoppable, a true master of destruction. As the locals emerged from their hiding places, they saw the aftermath of the slaughter. Believing Duncan to be their savior, they approached him with cheers and cries of gratitude. They hailed him as their champion, the one who had rid them of the Viking scourge. Duncan smiled, but it was a smile devoid of warmth or humanity. He had tasted the blood of warriors, but the hunger still gnawed at him, relentless and unyielding. The cheers of the villagers grated on his nerves, their joy an affront to the darkness within him. He set his sights on them, his eyes glowing with a cold, crimson light. Before they could react, Duncan unleashed his fury upon them. The screams of celebration turned to screams of terror as he descended upon the crowd, draining each and every one of their crimson life force. The blood flowed freely, and with each kill, Duncan felt his power grow. The villagers fell like wheat before the scythe, their bodies piling up as Duncan reveled in the slaughter. When the last of the villagers had been silenced, Duncan stood alone amidst the bodies, his thirst momentarily quenched, but his hunger for more still gnawing at his soul. The sky began to lighten as the first rays of dawn crept over the horizon. He had been so consumed by the bloodshed that he had not noticed the time slipping away. As the sunlight touched his skin, Duncan felt an agonizing pain sear through his body. He cried out, his voice a roar of agony as the light burned him. The knowledge, implanted deep within his mind by Nocturna, surged to the surface. He could not survive in the light. He was now a creature of the night, bound to the darkness, cursed to hide from the sun's deadly rays. Desperate to escape the burning light, Duncan fled from the village, his speed fueled by panic. He searched for shelter, the pain growing more intense with every passing second. Finally, he found refuge in an old cave by the shore, its entrance hidden among the rocks. The cave was dark and damp, the perfect sanctuary for a creature like him. As he collapsed onto the cold, wet stone, the burning pain subsided, leaving him weak but alive. The darkness enveloped him, comforting in its embrace. He could feel the hunger still lurking within him, a constant reminder of what he had become. But for now, it would have to wait. He needed to recover, to regain his strength, to plan his next move. Duncan McDruston, now the master of destruction, closed his eyes and waited for the night to fall once more. When the darkness returned, so too would his thirst for blood, his need to kill. The world had not yet seen the true extent of his wrath, but it would soon learn to fear the name of the Master. Dr. Thorne walked among the carnage left in the wake of the Master's rampage, his boots crunching over the blood-soaked earth and lifeless bodies. The once bustling village was now a silent graveyard, the air thick with the scent of death. Dr. Thorne looked down at the mangled remains, his lips curling into a smile of satisfaction. "Good luck keeping this one on a leash, Father," he muttered to himself. "Enjoy your plaything, for it will be a challenge, even for you." He gazed into the distance, his thoughts already drifting to his own plans. "While you revel in your new champion, I will seek out those who are truly worthy of becoming my children. Unlike you, I shall seek those who have suffered their whole lives, so their pain will become their greatest weapon. And when the war comes again, they shall flock to my side, not yours." With that, Dr. Thorne vanished into the shadows, leaving the scene of a devastation behind. His mind was set on finding the broken, the tormented, those whose lives had been shaped by suffering. He knew that the power of such souls, when turned to darkness, would be unmatched. They would be his army, his legacy, and when the time came, they would rise against Nocturna's forces. As night fell once more, the Master emerged from his damp cave, his senses heightened by the darkness. The hunger gnawed at him, a constant reminder of the insatiable thirst that now defined his existence. The taste of blood was still fresh in his mind, and the craving for more drove him forward. He stepped out into the moonlit night, the cool air doing little to quell the burning desire within him. The sea stretched out before him, its waves gently lapping against the shore. Somewhere beyond that vast expanse of water lay the greatest warriors, the ones who had bested him as a man. The memory of his defeat as Duncan McDruston, the invincible warrior brought low by overwhelming odds, fueled his rage. His mind was filled with thoughts of revenge, of the blood he would spill in the name of retribution. "My revenge will know no limits," he vowed, his voice a low, menacing growl. "I shall destroy each and every one of you. I shall cull your entire clan, your entire land. I will leave nothing but death in my wake. This I promise you." As the master stood on the shore, gazing across the sea, a presence watched him from the shadows, a darkness far older and more powerful than anything the master had yet encountered. It was the essence of Nocturna, the god of the elders, who had created this beast of destruction. Nocturna's essence swirled around the master, pleased with what he saw. Each kill, each act of violence would only strengthen his champion. The master's thirst for blood, his unrelenting hunger, would drive him to become the most feared creature to ever walk the earth. And Nocturna would be there, guiding him, feeding off the chaos and death that the master would bring. The master felt the darkness surrounding him, the cold, comforting presence of his god. It was as if Nocturna himself was whispering in his ear, urging him on, promising him power and destruction beyond his wildest dreams. With renewed purpose, the master turned away from the sea, his thoughts already on the next village, the next group of souls he would extinguish. The hunger would never be satisfied, but the thrill of the hunt, the ecstasy of the kill, would sustain him. As he moved through the shadows, a dark smile crossed his lips. He was no longer Duncan McDruston, the man. He was the master, the harbinger of death, the champion of Nocturna, and the world would soon tremble before him. Nocturna, watching from the depths of the shadows, was pleased. His creation was perfect, a creature of pure destruction. The world would burn, and in its ashes, Nocturna's power would grow, fed by the death and despair that the master would leave in his wake. The night was still young, and the master's reign of terror was just beginning. The calm before the storm. Part 2. Coming soon. As the master crosses the seas to the home of the Vikings, a storm of vengeance is about to be unleashed upon the Norsemen. Fueled by an insatiable hunger for blood and driven by a thirst for retribution, the master's fury will be unmatched. The lands of the Vikings will tremble under his wrath as he carves a path of destruction through their strongholds. But something ancient and powerful lies in wait for the master. Another beast of legend, one with the strength to counter even his most ferocious attacks. This creature, a force as terrifying as the master himself, will challenge him in a way he has never before experienced. Prepare to witness the terrifying hunger and destruction brought forth by the master and his creation, Azriel, a horrifying hybrid elder born from the darkest depths of vampiric power. Coming soon, only at Professor Shadow. Stay tuned for the next chapter in this epic saga of darkness, destruction, and legendary battles. The true extent of the Master's power will be revealed, and a new legend will be born. Don't miss it.